although we obviously disagree. I didn't say the grassroots rejected or didn't accept the Oslo process. I'm delighted that you have evidence that there were people supporting it. What I did say is they weren't involved in the process. I think there's a tremendous disconnect, at least in Israel, and I'm guessing also in Palestine, between the leadership and the grassroots activists who work for peace and reconciliation. I think that that's an issue. So it's wonderful that people supported the process, but they weren't really involved in it. And it almost didn't matter whether they supported it or not because of what was done by the leadership. Secondly, I definitely hope you didn't get from me the impression that the picture is rosy. And I agree with you, the Palestinian people are living under occupation. Occupation is terrible for them, but you know what? It's not good for us either to be occupiers. And I hope and pray that the occupation will end as quickly as possible. And I personally am willing to make many, many compromises. In my own city of Jerusalem, where I've lived for 42 years, I think we can even compromise on Jerusalem. And I could see it as the capital of the new Palestinian state. It could be, I think, a capital of two states. Okay? Now, interestingly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you spoke about living over there until 2000. I think that was the year that you mentioned. Well, I'm sorry to say that in the year 2000 was the beginning of the Second Intifada, which was the most horrible period I personally have ever lived through. Okay, I was born after World War II. For all Jews in the world, the Holocaust is a terrible memory. But I wasn't alive then. The worst experience that I personally have ever felt is the Second Intifada, where just about every day there were what was called suicide bombers. The truth is, I think they should have been called homicide bombers, because the point wasn't to commit suicide, the point was to kill as many innocent people with you when you're doing this. And you know that cafes were blown up, and pizzerias, and buses, and school children. It was a horrible time. I think many Palestinians recognize in retrospect it was a mistake. It didn't advance the Palestinian cause. And I think it set back the Israeli population a great deal. And it reinforced these mutual fears and anxieties and stereotypes, and it's terrible. So it's not coincidental that you mentioned the year 2000. That was a turning point in the history of this conflict, and I think a turning point for the worse. Finally, I guess I have to disagree with you on Zionism. I believe in the right of peoples of the world to national self-determination. I believe in the right of the Palestinian people to do that, and I believe in the right of the Jewish people to do that. I think it's okay for there to be a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. Just like I think it's okay for there to be France and Germany and Austria and Switzerland, and that's okay. Interestingly, I would have said Belgium, but now the Flemings and the Walloons are each claiming for themselves certain rights. So maybe we have to give more peoples more rights and have more countries. Maybe that's the solution. I don't know. And then I would say, why did I say that the best fulfillment of Zionism is when there'll be a Palestinian state alongside the Jewish state? Because, first of all, because there won't be an occupation anymore. And I think, as I said, I think the occupation is turning the Zionist dream into a nightmare for Palestinians and for us. But secondly, I want all the Israeli Palestinians to have the same choice that I had. What choice did I have? I could have stayed in the United States. Jews are not being persecuted, you know. I could have lived there. Most of my family stayed there, my friends. But I decided to leave the country where I was born and move to a place where I would be part of the majority, the religious, cultural, linguistic, ethnic majority. I would like an Israeli Arab to have the same choice. They can stay in Israel, I would hope, as first-class citizens. You're right in that, although we have no legal barriers, and Arabs in Israel, Palestinian Arabs, vote and serve in the Knesset, and have actually even served in the cabinet and in the foreign service. But there's still some prejudice and social discrimination, and you're quite right. When it comes to, for example, municipal budgets in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem doesn't get the same kind of economic benefits as West Jerusalem. That's a terrible thing. That has to be ended. But legally, there is no legal discrimination, and there's a process, and I'm told by my Arab friends that one of the prime ministers who did the most to encourage the process was Yitzhak Rabin, of blessed memory. Unfortunately, he was assassinated by an extremist Jew. Terrible. That was another turning point for the worse, 1995. So I'd like an Israeli Arab to be able to say, either I'll stay in Israel as a first-class citizen, but a member of a minority, or I'll move, not 6,000 miles, a few kilometers down the road to Palestine, where I'll be part of the majority, or maybe he won't have to move at all. Maybe we'll renegotiate the borders. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the solution is technically. But I think that's an important choice that a person should have, could have. Do you want to be part of the majority or part of the minority? I also hope that the State of Israel will lead the world in good majority-minority relations. We don't yet do that. But I think we should. I think that's a challenge and a goal for us.
Yes, thank you. A number of times you've mentioned that you'd like to see a Palestinian state. I'd be interested to know what borders you believe that state should have, and if not the green line, what should it be? And please don't say what is negotiated between the parties, because you know as well as I do that there will never be a negotiated settlement. And what would be wrong with the United Nations being arbitrator? What would be wrong with the United Nations arbitrating and saying this will be the border?
Okay. Well, I do think that a negotiated settlement is a good thing. And I think that part of the problem, and a lot of people in the world forget that it's almost 9 years ago, 2005.
What? Popping.
I'm sorry. Okay. I've never been accused before of popping.
It's a terrible disease.
In 2005, we unilaterally pulled out of Gaza, pulling out about 8,000 Jewish settlers. And after that, we were bombarded with rockets. And in retrospect, those of us who supported what we call the disengagement, and by the way, those to the right of us call it the exile, the expulsion, and all kinds of terrible words, but I see it as a disengagement. In retrospect, probably part of the problem was that it wasn't a negotiated settlement. It should have been. So I'm not sure that I agree with you on that particular point. But when you ask me about the borders, look, I think what you're really asking is about the settlements. Because I think, had we had this conversation 40 years ago, maybe it wouldn't really be such a big problem. What Israelis would have said is, we need secure and recognized borders. And that would be the major kind of request. Okay? Now, since then, a few 100,000 Jewish settlers have moved to settlements on the West Bank, and as I say, no longer in Gaza. When I say a few 100,000, because I understand that there's different ways of defining who is a settler. So for some people, it's over 600,000, and for others who define it differently, it's only, I'm putting only in quotation marks, about 350 to 400,000. It depends how you evaluate certain areas within Jerusalem, whether you see them as settlements or not. But for the purpose of this discussion, it doesn't really matter if it's only 400,000 or it's more than 600,000. It's still a lot of people. And the question is, what do we do with those Jews who are living in those settlements? Do we do what we did in Gaza and evacuate them, even using force? Well, maybe you could do that with 8,000 people. It's kind of hard to do it with close to 500,000. Can we do it through monetary compensation and incentives to make it attractive for them to move back within the 1967 borders? Maybe. Usually we say that most of them went there because they could have affordable housing and quality of life, and they're not hardcore ideologues. There are some who are. What do we do with them? Is it theoretically possible, I'm just throwing this out as a possibility, that we have in the state of Israel 20% of our population who are Arabs? Is it theoretically possible that Palestine could have maybe 5% of their population who are Jews? Is that a possibility? I don't know. You'd have to ask, first of all, the Palestinians, and then I guess you'd have to ask the settlers. I could see that as at least a theoretical possibility. Perhaps we have to renegotiate the borders and do land swaps. And that, by the way, is I think what's on the table. I think that is what is being talked about, or right now it's not being talked about, but it should be. The idea that we would essentially accept the 1967 borders with adjustments for certain settlement blocks in exchange for land swaps. I'm comfortable with that. By the way, if you noticed, and I'm speaking here as a religious person, and I quoted the Bible, and I quoted the rabbis, I have not mentioned at all the biblical borders of the land of Israel. I haven't mentioned that until this very moment. Why? First of all, because if you really read the Hebrew Bible, you'll see the borders are given a number of different times, and they're different in each time. So what are the borders of the biblical land of Israel? I don't know. I can tell you that there are certain places that are always within the borders, no matter what they're given as. And I'm even willing to compromise on that. I really don't want Hebron to be part of the state of Israel. I really don't want Shechem, Nablus, to be part of the state of Israel, even though it's within the biblical borders, because my second point is I'm basing Zionism not on the Bible. I'm basing Zionism on the modern recognized right of national self-determination. Now, you asked, and I'll conclude my answer with this, you asked about the UN. Could the UN be the third party? Well, on the one hand, you know, we came into existence through the UN. On November 29th, 1947, it was the UN partition plan. So, we came into existence then, and the partition plan called for the establishment of a Jewish state and an Arab state. That's what I'm talking about. The You would say, oh, of course, why not? The problem is, partly due to our own blunders, but partly due to many other geopolitical factors, the UN is an institution that is almost by definition hostile to Israel and the Jewish people. It has to do with the influence first of the Soviet Union and now of Russia. It has to do with the turn that's been taken within the Islamic world for a more radical kind of Islam. It has to do with lots of factors. So I think a lot of Israeli Jews are reluctant to see the UN playing this role because they think that, you know, it's like the cards are stacked against us from the beginning. I wish we weren't in that situation. I think the idea of the UN is a marvelous idea. The reality of the UN is a little bit different.
The gentleman there,
Okay.
and then the and
So shall we take two questions, one after the other?
two questions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, sure.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the first half of your lecture. And my question also was about borders, and while I was waiting, you've answered half of it. But yeah, so it's going to be fairly brief, I think. During Israel's history, and with its external wars, each time Israel's borders have changed and they've expanded. My question to you is, would you, are you in favour of another increase in Israel's border, say from the breakup of Syria, which could be on the cards? I mean, do you think Israel's current external borders should remain as they are now, this year? Because you briefly mentioned, you know, the complete border of Israel, and it is a fact that it has been changeable in the last 60 years or so. Should they stay as they are right now?
And we'll just ask
Yeah,
you
the
again.
rabbi.
Maybe
Rabbi,
take
to ask
both
the-
questions.
take both
Okay,
questions.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
My question's totally different.
That's all right.
So you started out by saying that, you know, there's peacemakers and peace builders, and you had to address an awful lot of questions about peacemaking. And I wanted to ask you a question as a peace builder. 42 years is an awfully long time to be hitting your head against the wall as a peace builder, and I'm wondering how you managed to hold on to a sense of optimism after all of this time. So.
Okay, I will do that. Okay. I'll try to do better with the microphone. I have to admit I'm a bit technologically challenged, so you notice I didn't have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. Thank you for these two questions. Let me begin by saying the borders of Israel have actually decreased in the last 47 years. And it happened under one of our right-wing prime ministers, Menachem Begin, of blessed memory, who gave up all of the Sinai Peninsula as part of the peace agreement with Egypt. Now, I'll tell you, I was living in Israel then. And there was a survey done about a week before Sadat surprised us by coming. Would you be willing to give up the Sinai for peace? And the overwhelming majority of Israeli Jews said no. Sadat came, and we gave up the whole thing, and it was more than 90% of the Israeli population supported giving up the Sinai for the peace treaty with Egypt. So we did that. We have that as a model. Syria, I don't know about that. I think somebody asked me, was it you? You asked me, if my political views have changed since you asked me that, since I came to Israel, and I have to say, at the time I said, no, they haven't, but actually, now that I think about it, I used to be part of the minority, but it was a sizable minority of people